I'm your host, D.L. Morris, and this is Tales from the Polyverse. First contact is often a sticky situation, especially when you have convinced yourself that you are alone in the galaxy. But what if it wasn't? Using journal entries, this tale shows what could happen if on the receiving end of an actual WOW signal. Enjoy.
The Polyverse presents the Kyoto Protocol. 5th of Harvest, 3314. It was a night like any other night. I was monitoring the equipment of the Lathian Radio Observatory, just staring at the screen, waiting for something to happen. As I sat there nearly napping, head nodding and eyes too glassy, static erupted from the speakers, launching my heart into the ceiling. My ears perked up, my snout twitched. I was suddenly more than awake and a second away from soling myself. As adrenaline coursed through my system, I set about willing myself to be calm as I set about adjusting the signal gain, careful not to scratch the equipment with my untrimmed claws. As I worked, all the possibilities zipped and zapped through my head as I tried to figure out what this signal was. As I adjusted the squelch, I could just make out distinct beeps being demodulated from an artificial carrier. It was a signal! Heart in my throat, I verified that the computer was recording everything, and because I hate single points of failure, or SPOFs, I set up an auxiliary recorder with my personal equipment. There was, of course, a first contact protocol. The government bureaucratizes everything. The scientific community, as always, had to tiptoe around the dogmatics, still somehow the dominant force on our world of Kyoto. Thus, whenever some new discovery could knock them off their gilded pedestal, we had to go about according to a rigid procedure designed to dishearten and poke holes more than to be any actual use. I rushed to the phone and quickly dialed the observatory's director, making only a few missed calls. "We have a signal, sir." I could hardly keep my enthusiasm in check. "Yes, of course. The observatory's mainframe is recording it. So far, the strength is good. Yeah, it's apparently from the Thadian cluster. Yes, sir. It was a great night." 6th of Harvest. The signal was still going strong as the sun began to climb above the horizon. I communicated with our sister stations on the far side of the world about what I found and what they should keep an eye out for, and to continue recording. After the director arrived, we went over the recording and prepared for an endless set of meetings. When all was said and done, it was a long morning, but the excitement kept me going. "Is everything still green?" the director asked as he walked into the conference room yet again. He was a distinguished man who had aged better than gracefully. He was only a few years from retirement, so as long as we did our jobs, we had little to worry about when it came to the kind of inane nonsense corporate climbers like to play. His graying long furs looked good on him. His snout, which at his age could start to lose its cartilage, was still filled in nicely. Despite his tenure coming to an end, he always pushed all of us to our best, and I was happy that I could give him this last gift before he left. "Yes, sir. Yethal Observatory has picked up the transmission and is continuing to record. Those clay-toting dogmatics won't be able to deny it this time." The rest of the night crew was beginning to slow down. We were all usually asleep by now. They all nodded in agreement but did not feel the need to vocalize it. I guess they weren't nearly as excited about this as I was. "When you're stuck to the past, you can deny anything," the director finally managed after a sigh. "Governor Kirsty broke protocol and told the local news stations I'm going to have to hold a press conference in the Pantheon, right in front of the statue of Orain, one of the old gods." "Oh yeah, the Allfather. Awesome." I rolled my eyes. Does that man ever think before he opens his mouth? While not a full-fledged dogmatic himself, the governor was definitely not a man of science. Given the choice, he would lean towards the religious, if only to preserve his candidacy. After all, the dogmatics offered a person of variable enough scruples, power, and the promise of achievement. Thinking about it, he must have a dogmatic on his payroll, or be on the payroll of one who looked over everything that he did and made certain he acted with their interests in mind. "I have nothing to say about that man," the director returned flatly. He knew how to play the game, even if he preferred to sit on the sidelines as far afield as possible. I have to get going. Don't want the public to think we're afraid, or worse yet, fabricating evidence. I stood up quickly as he was about to open the door. Sir? We would like to stand behind you for this. I looked around and the others nodded in agreement. Well, most of them. Then let's move out. A crowd had already gathered by the time we arrived. Lights flashed, noise filled the air. This was not a comfortable situation. The director took a deep breath and approached the podium. The Pantheon was a park temple shrine to the gods, though the dogmatics had pretty much killed off all the other religions and assumed their traditions for their own. It was an obvious ploy to keep them on the minds of everyone who witnessed the proceedings. Their subtlety was anything but. They were always so afraid of change that they would sacrifice their own kids, if only to preserve the power of their teachings. Last night, at 20 till midnight, our radio telescope operators picked up a signal that appears to have originated from beyond our solar system, he read from a prepared script. At this time, Yathal Radio Observatory has taken over recording as our telescope is no longer in the line of sight of the apparent source. The murmurs started. The dogmatics controlled the hearts and minds of the common folk. Even the few that thought for themselves did not want to be under the scrutiny of the dogmatics. The director, sensing the change in atmosphere, abandoned his speech. We in the scientific community encourage all to remain calm and take this news with a grain of salt. It was always suspected that the discovery of life outside our solar system would set off alarms, but we had no idea it would be this bad. The crowd began to accuse us of not only manufacturing the signal, but of hiding the fact of a flat world and so many other things, some of which had nothing to do with the signal. Soon, some began to protest and scream as a full-blown riot was starting. This was not a good day after all. Even the dogmatics had to pretend to play nice once in a while. The police quickly interceded before the riot could begin in earnest. They were forced to quickly escort us to waiting cars to prevent the crowd from hurling anything more dangerous than insults at us. The 15th of Harvest. The week was long, and people were constantly looking at me and seeing the riot that destroyed several of the Pantheon's most prized marble statues. Not only that, it was also extremely troublesome to get to and from work, as many had begun to picket the observatory. Fortunately, the observatory was on an island, a little way off the coast, and only accessible via a long causeway, which was currently closed to the public. The news outlets had taken the story and run with it, adjusting the facts as they needed to fit their truth. Tonight I had been booked to speak on Tonight with Weald Hensbane, a very prestigious late-night talk show, to speak about the discovery and set some things straight. I was only too happy to oblige, especially as a moratorium on scientific pursuits was placed on the city. I waited in the wings, not so patiently, pacing as the host did what he did best, talk the audience's ear off. Presently, he came to the reason I was here. And tonight, we decided to shift gears a little. Instead of one single guest at a time, we'll have a little bit of a debate. What the hey? My ears perked up in alarm as I turned to the stage manager. I didn't know about this. What's the matter, science guy? Scared of a little friendly competition? It's just a rating stunt, no big deal. He'll do great. She tried and failed to hide her contempt of me and my work. It'll be fine. Just be yourself, With that, she pushed me through the curtain as Weald announced me. For the scientific community, Mr. Tassian Kane. I stumbled. The lights were blinding. I couldn't see the audience, and I didn't know if I was breathing. This did not faze the next guest, whom Weald was proudly introducing. And for the rest of us, Deacon Hailstrom Varney. The audience cheered for Varney. He was, after all, the favorite spokesman for the dogmatics. He was tall and lean, the current vision of sexiness in the world. His fur was a pleasant cream color, a stark contrast to my own gunmetal gray. He waved at the crowd, smiled, shook my hand, shook Weald's hand, and generally hammed it up. I instantly hated him. On autopilot, I approached the desk, shook hands with the host, and tried to play the crowd as Farney did. Didn't work out. I struggled to wrap my head around what was going on, and my face was a complete blank. Farney insisted I, not he, take the chair closest to the host's desk, the position of prestige. What was going on? So, Wield began as the crowd calmed to a murmur, "You are part of a team that claims to have received a signal from beyond the stars, huh?" "Still in the stars," I shifted uncomfortably, "but the signal did appear to have originated from outside the solar system." "How do we know you didn't fabricate it?" The deacon instantly went on the offensive. "The instruments showed a distinct directionality that triangulates." I tried to show the calculations I drew up. "We only have your word for that," the deacon snarked. "For all we know, you made those numbers up." "Well, you see, and any idiot—" "Oh, so we're idiots now, huh?" "No, I didn't say— Don't answer that. We all know what you people think of us," he cut me off. "But tell me this. How much power would it take for even a directional signal, let alone an omnidirectional one, to travel light years? I've read your work. They wouldn't know which direction we were in relation to them. It'd be pretty rare, right?" For a moment I was flattered that he'd read my paper. Then I realized it was only to humiliate me. I fumbled through my notes as I did a quick calculation in my head. "Well, the low side, 3 trillion terawatts." "So, more power than we could make in a decade, huh?" the deacon scoffed, smiling at the crowd. "Just because we lack the technology—" "Yeah, on technology, we know we don't have the knowledge. What makes you sure that they use a similar means of communication, let alone technology?" His smile was demonic. This was a trap, and I pranced proudly into it. "Not to mention, a race that can travel the stars would by necessity need to travel faster than light, which science says is impossible. Why would they use light-speed communications for this? It'd be a little slow for them, wouldn't it?" The audience was just eating this up. He always knew what to say, and he'd probably had time to prepare properly. He had the luxury to ignore them. He knew they were eating out of his paw. Well, I had no answer. The question made too much sense. I hated it when dogmatics used logic against me. It was the only time that they didn't outright ignore it. Lightspeed is, well, the fast we can go, I thought I had recovered. As we understand it, it is a universal speed limit. We don't know what their motivations are. Maybe they're looking for pen pals?
Motives, right, cute. We can't know them, or their motives, so let's put that aside, he huffed. But if they could be our new besties, they could have all the answers we seek in the universe. But if they had all the answers, why not just give them to us?
I don't think they would.
Well, we can agree on something at least,
he laughed. I loathed him even more.
We wouldn't be able to communicate with them at all. Aliens would not speak any of our languages.
I was conflicted. Wield made no comment. He was not helping or hurting, but he could end this at any time. I doubted I would ever watch Tonight again. Yes, well, we would have some work to do, sure, deciphering and all. The crowd was turning ugly. Is this some kind of all-father nonsense? As soon as I said that, I knew I shouldn't have. This was what he had been waiting for.
Nonsense,
he laughed, somehow managing to calm the crowd again.
Setting that aside, this was supposed to be about science. I was not going to bring it up, but since you did...
It was all downhill from there. No matter what I said or didn't say, I was booed and threatened. By the time I got home, it was all I could do just to fall into sheets and not die. I was bedridden for days, on the verge of suicidal depression. Thankfully, the director understood. He even gave a courtesy call every day to check on me. 4th of Night Frost, several weeks later. The Hall of Atonement was one of the places people go to be sorry and not sorry for things they have done, to tell their sins to the gods that should already know them. For the past month, me and the rest of the team that had first recorded the signal were made to feel miserable about it. It had come to the point that if I wanted to continue to live in peace and to do my job, I had to recant everything I had said about this alleged discovery. And so here I was, with the few of the team that could stomach a saving face for the greater good. We had to get back to real work, even if it was in the background. Forever forward and all that. The media, unsurprisingly, was making a big deal out of it. Though it was one of the Dogmatics' favorites, this kind of thing would be downplayed. Typical. In the hall, the crowd entered. I just hoped this would be a friendlier crowd than at the Pantheon. I waited in the wings for the appointed time, chatting with the now former director of the observatory. I was lucky compared to him. He was being forced to retire early, so that most of his life's work could be saved.
I'm sorry you have to do this, son, the director told me. I tried to keep the crew out of this.
Me? You had to step down, I tried before he calmed me.
At least it's retirement and not fired or imprisonment. Half full, remember?
He put a paw on my shoulder.
Science must always strive to move forward, even as the dogmatics work doggedly to tradition and the status quo. I regret nothing, and neither should you. You have to keep the torch lit.
But heaven forbid anyone see it, sir. I tried not to scoff as I adjusted my collar. If I were religious, I might feel nervous about stretching the truth here.
I think you might need a drink anyway, the former director chuckled. But nerves are just, under these circumstances. We all have to do what we can to keep the ball moving. I am proud that you have the wherewithal to follow through with this.
I had never liked dressing up. This suit, under the best of circumstances, felt tight. But today it was neighboring on unbearable. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the commenters continued to drone on and on about some topic I couldn't be bothered to pay attention to. Eventually, it was time to pay the piper. After a few deep breaths, I walked onto the stage, my steps echoing on the hard surface. I strode, as reverently as I could manage, to the lectern, and took another calming breath. The world is full of mysteries that I, as a scientist, have spent a lifetime working to solve. My voice wavered, my paws shook as I changed my cue cards. Fortunately, the best lies have a kernel of truth within them. My team and I have been involved in the plot to destroy the old ways. Forever. The crowd appeared to accept this statement. One less thing to worry about. What we have been calling a signal can't at this time be verified, and I apologize for all the trouble that this has caused. My short remarks complete, I waited for the Hawk, or senior most dogmatic of the area, to preside over the final recantation. He silently strode up, his shoes a whole lot softer than mine as the dark black shiny robes wafted in the breeze of his movements. His face was mostly impassive, but I could see a smirk. He knew this was a strategic victory for his side.
Do you, Tyson Kane, acknowledge the fallacy of your most recent work?
He purposefully ignored my title. I knew that if they could, they would shut down all scientists. But they needed us to make their lives easier and to keep the flocks alive. Some scientists even worked to prove the dogmatics' truth. I just had to keep the bile down long enough for this to be over and official, so I could get back to work. Yes, I was led astray, led amok, by a very charismatic man. The words were like sewage in my mouth, but I had to continue. There is no evidence to support the idea of extraterrestrial life.
And do you, here and now, affirm the righteousness of the Dogmatica?
I do, I said aloud, and then under my breath, not.
You are forgiven, and can be gone,
he dismissed. The Dogmatics knew they could only push one so far. Humiliation was good, but only in small, controlled amounts. Pushing someone too far made for very sticky situations. I was so glad that this was over. But, as I was about to step off the stage, he called out,
One final thing, Doctor.
He managed to make it sound like a curse.
Was there a signal?
The Dogmatics had systematically used their influence and called in favors to gather and destroy all official copies and even some of the unofficial ones. He knew the answer, but the crowd needed me to say it.
There are no records.
I kept to the half-truths, but silently added, "Nevertheless, there is one." 7th of Night Frost, 3317.
What do you suppose they look like?
Over the years, I had kept trying my darndest to decode the signal, but I was getting nowhere fast. I had recently come to the epiphany that I needed help. Help I could trust not to think on me, and that was the rub. I had been looking everywhere I could for someone good enough with a computer code, but with uncommon discretion. So far, I had had no luck. That was the only reason, despite my growing aversion to public places, I was in this cafe, looking over my shoulder like a nervous wreck. Because I was publicly despised, I really didn't have to worry too much about people watching me, but I couldn't help myself. While the patio was more comfortable, here I was, sitting in the stuffy interior, trying to ignore the young woman standing in front of me. What do who look like, miss? I started, pretending to be distracted by the menu. She didn't take the hint. She stood with her back to the doors, engulfed in a halo cast by the sun through the windows. Her light rust-colored fur dotted with nice charcoal color, the long furs on the top of her head were curly and bounced with energy. I had to admit, I was enthralled, but this wasn't the time. Not like anything would happen anyway.
Name's Scarlet, and I was talking about...
She glanced toward the door and then continued in a conspiratorial tone.
the people that sent us the message from, you know.
You must be mistaken. There was no message. I still hated the lie.
You ain't fooling me.
Her smile was seductive.
I know and accept what happened. And it's those stupid dogmatics and their cover-ups. They didn't even do a good job about it.
They're not stupid, I sighed, wishing I had the guts to say it. And you shouldn't really be talking like that about them. I groaned again, not certain I was being watched or she wasn't a trick. I was paranoid after the Tonight Show. And the only thing that was confirmed, before we all recanted the work to continue other work, was that the signal was artificial.
Yeah, I know about all that forced recantation nonsense. I have actually been trying to get a hold of you at the right time for about a year.
She smiled again, leaning closer.
And signal means a message.
As she spoke, her eyes lit up with excitement.
It could be anything. A picture, words, a rousing speech. We just have to figure it out.
She tried to suppress her excitement and increasing the volume. It sort of worked. I again had to sigh through a lie. The recordings were destroyed.
I know your work. You always have a backup.
She smiled beautifully. I was more than excited she knew of me and my work. I would have to read her work. Was she published? What the hell did she do?
I want to help,
she continued unabated.
I, too, am tired of my own work being put against their stupid book with no answers.
I know the feeling. Hopefully this wasn't a trap. I wanted to get to know her. But, really, what can we do about it?
Right now,
she shrugged, sitting.
Nothing. But when we get it decoded and whatnot, there may be something. And two heads are better than one.
Except when you are trying to keep a secret, I suggested.
True,
she agreed easily. Then she shushed me. How did she know someone was walking up behind her?
Hey, Tyson, didn't realize you were on or busy?
The gruff voice of my potential conspirator announced. Oh, hi, Dave. I rose to shake his paw. Scarlet here was just leaving. Dave was one of those young techies that understood the gadgets in a way I never would. Fresh out of the military where he learned all about the skills I needed, his sandy brown fur still shone with the sheen of youth. He was here because he could help with a problem that we were having with the antenna, and it had been hell to track him down low-key. And if it didn't work out... But here he was, and I was not going to allow this opportunity to pass me by.
Not in your life,
Scarlet objected too loudly to me. Then to Dave,
Why are you here, Dave?
Came to meet a friend, and maybe talk shop.
He shrugged. Looks like I made a good choice with him. Yes, Scarlet, we're planning on making an upgrade to the computer array at the observatory. I cut her off before she could get anything else out. And that work is sadly classified.
Ah, so you got a techie to look through your recording stuff. Smart,
she acquiesced, returning to her seat.
What the hell did you tell her?
Dave demanded quietly in my ear as he sat down. I didn't say a thing. She just showed up, I returned in his ear.
FYI, I can hear you both, she chuckled. And for better or worse, you have to trust me. I probably want this more than you two combined.
Me and Dave looked at each other for a moment before I shook my head. Fine. It's too late now. Dave, Scarlet, Scarlet, Dave. Fine, Dave grunted. You said you had a copy? It was my understanding that the dogmatics wiped the drives worldwide.
He had a copy saved backup, right? You did. Say you did, didn't you?
Scarlet bubbled. She was way too excited and on the verge of being too loud. Shush you! I glared at her. And yes, I always have a backup. I pulled out a small drive with a copy of my copy. He looked it over before replying. What exactly did you record? Dave asked, putting the drive in his satchel. The microwave spectrum in the vicinity of the central band of the carrier, as well as the AM and FM demodulated tones ranging from 30 Hz to 720 Hz. You demodulated? Yes, like I said, I recorded both the carrier plus and minus 30% and the demodulated tones. They were demodded in parallel so as to ensure no loss in the signal. I have been working with signals longer than you've been alive. Good, I was afraid you only got the demod. He sighed in relief. Well, if it was sent by aliens, and we have no idea how it is demodulated in the first place, so it's the most important piece of the puzzle to have.
Wow, Scarlet marveled. Here I was expecting your techie to have been brainwashed like the rest of the herd.
And what the hell do you do? Dave scoffed. Surely not techie stuff.
For your information, I am an evolutionary anthropologist, and as you can imagine, the dogmatics don't like me using that title. Pompous asses.
For the next few hours, we discussed our little project's path, including our ground rules, which were 1. Any new member had to be approved by all of us. 2. Under no circumstances was any dogmatic to learn what we were doing. 3. Anyone caught would be disavowed by the rest. We realized by the end that this was going to be a far longer and more difficult process than we thought. The 27th of ripening. The little group I had started that day grew slowly as we learned that we needed some different expertise than what we started with. We had found people all over the planet we could trust. Somehow, in all of this, we spawned secret little chapters as some left and wanted to keep in touch and started their own cabals. I found it odd. The signal had lasted only just shy of 36 hours, and the observatories all over the world confirmed that it didn't come from here. But people still found a way to refuse to accept. The dogmatics had more of a hold on their minds than I had given them credit for, and they would mercilessly dismantle the lives of anyone that refused to recant statements that the dogmatics had found sacrilegious and refused to return to the fold. I had learned over the years that my own recantation, so soon after the initial discovery, put me in a position not quite over the edge but far enough that I could do what I wanted and be left alone, mostly. Others had not acted, and their lives were ruined, living on the streets with no useful skills. I had, in fact, become quite the conspirator, not something I ever wanted on my resume. In order to cover up our meetings, Scarlet had helpfully pointed out we all needed to be more social. She even gave me pointers, and I was getting better at it than I had ever thought possible. I had even managed to get some tutoring on the game of politics from the former director before he passed. All of this meant that I was making a name for myself, and that helped in both worlds I was living. The dogmatics even, on occasion, asked me to play devil's advocate, because everyone knew I had disagreed with them and still played in their sandbox. All in all, I was living multiple lives, the fake one in the light and my real one in the dark. Really, I was having the time of my life despite it all. Morning twilight spread from the eastern edge of the ocean, slowly overpowering the small lamp on my desk as I finished up the previous night's reports. I stood and stretched. It had been a long night, and still no second wow signal from above, which naysayers used as proof that there was no signal. I chugged the rest of my cold coffee, logged off the computer, and shut off my light. Time for Brenner, I declared to no one in particular. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the hall. Then, on impulse, I stuck my snout into the next office. "Hey, Thane, I was thinking of heading to Leopard's Lodge for some chow. You sure you don't want to come along this time?" Thane was an imposing scientist. Tall, strong, athletic, ridiculously intelligent, and hopelessly devoted to Dogmatica. Despite being my age, his dark, on the verge of being black-brown fur had the sheen of youth. It was like the Dogmatics had a secret youth formula.
Not this time, he groaned. The ex is coming into town with the kids. Have to spend the whole day with that bitch.
Well, you're lost, man, then, I shrugged and closed the door. It was just as well. He wasn't invested in the search for extraterrestrial life. In fact, he was the biggest opposition I had. He wanted to use science to prove Dogmatica. Weirdo. I always invited him out of habit, since he had arrived to take over the co-director's spot opposite mine. It had to look like I was willing to work with him and never avoiding him. Thankfully, he refused more often than not. I hated that stuck-up prick. The few occasions he did tag along, the team had a protocol. Despite the big promotion, I had kept my old office in the Lethean Observatory and stuck mainly to the night shift, all the better to see the signals from space and not be interrupted. This was one of the few jobs where the first shift was at night and the off shift was during the day. Guess it was true that any publicity was good publicity. This was a typical quiet time in the morning. The night owls like me were leaving, and the day shift hadn't quite arrived yet. This facility had both visual and radio telescopes, so we could more easily compare and contrast observations. By the time I drove out of the subterranean parking complex, the sun had made it over the horizon. It was officially morning. We were on the edge of the city, still on our island, on the tallest peak of the area, with the causeway connecting us to the mainland, almost 2 kilometers long. It was the longest such structure in the world. The city was proud of our technical marvel. The city itself, Novostatin, was pressed right up against the ocean. Only the craggy cliffs had survived the onslaught of civilization. The few beaches in the northern hemisphere were closed this time of year. Even if they weren't, it was too early for vacationers to venture into the shore. I entered the city proper. The skyscrapers towered overhead. This was a thriving city. People from all over the world congregated at this center of science, the most defiance of the dogmatics we could really muster. I was so glad to be in the center of the storm, where we would solve this riddle. Now, instead of beat-up property beyond the suburbs, I lived in an upscale neighborhood deep within the city, within walking distance of anything I might want to do. I hated driving in the metropolis, after all. I pulled into the building's parking garage, cruised slowly until I came to my assigned spot, and pulled in. Though it had been a long night, I still had things to do. After locking the car, I inhaled deeply and headed to the street-level exit. The streets were always busy, drones going about their lives oblivious to everything but themselves. After purchasing a nice hot coffee to tide me over, I started off to Leopard's Lodge. Here, since the beginning, those of us that accepted the truth met. Like always, the few tables outside in view of the various levels of catwalks and buildings were full of customers, and the inside was low on people. Our spot was in the back, where few ever went. No use in tempting fate too much, after all. I greeted Jade, my usual waitress. She was one of our team, if only in spirit. After all she could really do was stay on the lookout for us, and we were thankful for that.
Usual, Tyson?
She asked, already bringing my standard order. Thanks, Jade, hear it all.
I know.
She smiled, handing me my plate.
The others are already set up. Here, Dave has something big.
The thought of something new sent adrenaline surging through my body. After nearly a decade, had we finally cracked the signal? I hurried to the table and began to tear into my breakfast. It was important to keep our society as secret as possible, so Dave casually looked up, then casually drew a line on a napkin. I drew another line to make it look like a cross-section of a saucer. This continued until all of us had been confirmed. The 7.
So, Jade said y'all had some news, Dave?
Scarlett asked as she, too, was excited. Like usual, but it was growing on me. Scarlett was now a professor of anthropology and archaeology at the local university. We were making all kinds of useful connections, even though she insisted she was pioneering the new field of xenoanthropology. The others kept quiet and sluggishly ate, as it was too early for them, though they had contributed greatly to the cause. Dave glared at me.
She needs to be more discreet. You need to fix your girl.
Hey, you're the one that brought her into this, I protested, then shoved more food into my mouth. Ugh, fine, I'll talk to her, he groaned. But yes, I have exciting news.
Don't you all keep us in suspense, Scarlet started. Don't tell me you finally managed to decode that signal, huh?
Well, no, but we did manage to confirm that it's the same 30-minute signal that repeated over and over.
We all knew that a week ago,
Scarlet groaned, mirroring my reaction as she accepted a drink from Jade.
I hoped that it was something, important.
But last week, we didn't know it was a digital multiplexed signal.
Of course it's digital, but that's how we know it's artificial.
What that means, Dave insisted as he forcefully continued, we're looking at over 10 teraflops of data. Who knows what the message has in it?
Look, Scarlet grumbled. You're the computer guy, but I still don't understand how we actually expect to decode any of this. I admit, I was hopeful in the beginning, but we're having problems even figuring out dead language of Skellion. And that language was made by us, and the signal was sent by aliens, an entirely different and unknown species. Is it even possible to get something useful from it?
Well, it's a computer signal, and computers use patterns, no matter what species made it, or how they think. There are certain laws of physics that govern how the conversion of information into bits occurs. We just have to find that pattern, Dave insisted. Now that he was the owner of a cybersecurity firm with multiple supercomputers at his disposal, he was the leading expert planet-wide on computer technologies. He was able to use his company to decode our communications in secret, despite being right under the snouts of the dogmatics. But how do we know if those patterns are supposed to be sound or art or whatever? I asked, brushing Scarlet's paw and smiling at her in support. For a moment, Dave had no answers. He just sat there with a blank face. That's what algorithms are for. We just set up a data block, start a rendering program, and see what we get. We're still years away from that, though. 19th of Harvest, 3327. Small things, traveling slowly, were difficult at best to detect. Nevertheless, Thane was meticulous and managed to find an object with his optical telescope at the observatory.
Tyson,
He called from his office where he monitored the screens and crunched numbers.
have your receivers monitored anything from the Thadian cluster?
Not recently. Why? I returned, stepping through the door. That's not a section of sky we normally monitor because there's no known celestial bodies along that trajectory.
Well, over the past few weeks, I've been tracking a 50,000-ton object on what looks like a highly elliptical orbit that has the surface whose reflection coefficient indicates it's artificial.
Just to cover your bases, you did check the near-planet trajectory list, right? I asked, struggling to appear helpful. Well, I know you did. I just had to dummy check, Protocol.
You would know more about jumping the gun than I would, he joked.
I think he joked, and I hoped he didn't see me sneer.
Would it be possible for you to train your arrays on it?
To what end?
As you said, we have to cover all our bases. Wouldn't want those weirdo former compatriots of yours to think we were hiding evidence or covering up something.
I shrugged while I quickly suppressed my hatred and came up with a reasonable response that wouldn't out me. No, we definitely wouldn't, but that area is out of line of sight for right now. I can ask the senior fellow at Yathal.
No, it's not critical.
Not certain where he was going or if I would like the destination, I returned. I can devote some time tomorrow then. That be alright?
That'd be great.
His smile was almost sickening.
Are you planning on going to, what is that place you're always talking about, Leopard's Lodge today?
Yeah, probably. Why?
I'd really like your input on this.
He waved his data pad with numbers on stuff on it. Sure, we can go, but without looking at your work, I can't offer anything substantial.
That's fine. I just want to spar with the world's greatest devil's advocate stand-in, so I can be ready for my debates. I'll let you take a look over them final points while we wait for service.
Sounds great. I struggle not to sound surprised and or defeated. This was one of our meeting days. I hoped nothing significant was going to be on the table. I'd hate to have missed it.
I see you have a guest,
Jade announced as we walked in.
We have a table for you, right here by the door.
Perfect, Jade. I smiled pleasantly as I took a seat at the indicated table. Can we get menus, please?
I don't need a menu, Thane gruffly returned. I'll have a coffee with bacon and eggs if you have them.
And how would you like them cooked, dear?
she asked pleasantly. Her black and white pinstripe fur bristled with nerves.
Bacon crispy, egg scrambled, hard.
Thane returned, not even paying attention to her. He never noticed the help at all. They weren't worth his time. Sounds good. I'll have the same, I grimaced.
Coming up, hun.
She smiled pleasantly but artificially, as only a waitress could, then walked away. I smiled over at the Sevens table and was pleased to see it was empty. Perhaps nothing of note was going to happen after all. Just as I settled in for a long morning after work, Dave rushed in. He looked at the back table, realized no one was there, and then looked about frantically. Then he noticed me.
Tyson, you're not going to believe this. Major breakthrough.
Oh, hi, Dave. This is Dane. He works at the observatory with me.
Good morning, Dave.
Thane emotionlessly intoned. He was always on the lookout for a way he could get ahead with as little effort as possible, so this perked up his ears.
What kind of breakthrough could you two be working on together?
I knew he had nothing, and it wasn't a good thing to stare blankly at Thane, especially when you were trying to think up an answer to a question he had asked. I thought quickly through my list of pre-planned responses. Dave here is helping me to upgrade, or should I say we are trying to plan an upgrade to our RT arrays. You know how upper management likes to have a plan for everything a year in advance of the start, right?
And Dave gets this excited about upgrades?
Weird, I know, but that's why he's a techie. He gets excited about, techie stuff. Thane was suspicious by nature. If I answered a question again posed to Dave, he would know something was up, and would stop at nothing to see it to the end. I had witnessed it too many times. I was glad I was so practiced at deception, because if I wasn't, I would be about to die. I just hoped I had bought enough time for Dave to come up with something.
So tell me, Dave, what is this breakthrough you came in babbling in about?
His eyes flickered down as he dug for a response.
Reservoir issues. We were trying to stretch their freak range of the antenna, but if you stretch the threshold too much, you lose a lot of the receipt threshold. So how did you fix this problem? I'm listening. Well, you see, you make it dynamic, continuously cycling receive module, shutting the signal down the appropriate line. You effectively triple the range. And you're excited because you've already designed this thing already? Well, no, you see, he smiled weakly. I was so excited I figured out how to solve it. I kind of forgot to solve it. Like you said, techie, we're crazy about this stuff.
Thane sat there and nodded for a moment, considering the statements.
So, go design your thing, then get back to us.
He finally dismissed Dave. Dave scuttled off. I just wish I could have joined him. Thane was just too oppressive to be around long term.
That is why I hate engineers, and there are protocols to find the right ones for projects we do.
What can I say? I chuckled uneasily, suppressing the urge to make sure Dave had left. Trying to save money and stuff,
Can't fault you for that.
Thane sighed. While he had dropped it for now, it was not over. Never would be over. Dave would have to be careful.
Now, about this object.
It turned out that Dave had cracked one of the files. Using that information, he was able to start identifying all types of files. It was definitely a giant leap in the right direction, and yet there I was, discussing transquolian objects with my nemesis. 3rd of Night Frost, several weeks later. The last few weeks had been painful. Thane had watched my every move, looking for signs of sedition. Fortunately, he was too distracted by his object, now called O2RIP3327NQ17, to follow through on anything else meaningfully. I provided radio telemetry from time to time, and it seemed to sedate him. I was so worried about getting caught that I hadn't made it to any of the meetings for a while now. Thane was a dude! This morning I was excited. It was finally a day I could risk going to a meeting, and I had something to contribute for a change. I was able to go because Thane had begun leaving early, and my counter spies informed me he spent most of the time he was not at work, in his house. He claimed he was a little sick, but his general lack of interest and energy was almost enough for me to be worried. Maybe his sickness had something to do with NQ17. The trending possibilities were not favorable to the dogmatics. With a spring in my step, I walked into the lodge and greeted Jade. For the first time in a month, I was not the least bit worried about who might see me.
Finally got rid of your shadow, hon. She smiled. You're actually the first one here today. I'll be right out with your usual.
I took a seat and got comfortable to wait for the others. I hadn't even felt the need to drink copious amounts of coffee to keep me charged this morning. Today was going to be a great day. Scarlett made her entrance in her usual bubbly fashion and sat down with a smile and a peck on my cheek.
I knew you all couldn't come because of Thane, so you don't know.
She was bouncy in excitement. And what, pray tell, would that be, Foxy? I smiled. I might just start something with her.
Well, I like it when you call me that.
She smiled, more wickedly than ever.
Well, you all know Dave managed to get a text file opened up.
Unless you're a xenolinguist too, that doesn't help much.
Oh, but this is even better.
She was giddy as a school pup.
One of those all-surface files was a set of schematics, apparently. Now, we couldn't read the words, obviously, but some of those technical symbols showed Dave's team how to open up other files. We finally have a picture of them.
I couldn't help but get a bit caught up in her excitement, but I did make sure that the coast was clear. Foxy, remember to stay quiet. This is still a secret. But what do they look like?
Upright, furless, bipedal apes.
She looked around, then showed me a pic. It was impossible to tell what gender it was, but it did have clothes, proving that it was sapient. It was not completely furless. It did have long furs on top of its head, but lacked short furs of the rest of its body. While we had, despite the dogmatic allegations to the contrary, evolved from canine-like ancestors, this thing was definitely monkey-like. I found it simply disturbing. Scarlett, though, was apparently mesmerized, which was a bit creepy, but I think I could deal with that.
I see our Scarlett has jumped the gun and showed you the pic,
Dave droned as he took his seat.
Now whose woman needs to put in her place?
Shut it, Dave. We finally have proof.
Scarlett, honey, I hated to rain on her parade. That thing looks so creepy, many will think it's a horror movie prop, and therefore won't take it as proof. She looked at the picture, back at us, at the picture, then around, and finally her shoulders slumped in acceptance.
I guess you're all right, but the look in your eyes says you have something.
As a matter of fact, I do, I grinned, pulling up Thane's observational notes from my bag. This object, based on Thane's own meticulous calculations, came from the Thadian cluster. Yeah, the same place as the original signal, and it will pass right by us in 5 years.
You sure he ain't yanking your chain?
Jade cut in, serving my Brenner.
That guy doesn't appear to have a sense of humor at all,
Dave absently replied as he looked over the notes.
Now, I don't know much about astronomy and his observations, but I do know a lot about math, and this looks legit.
Then we have a window.
Scarlett smiled. It was definitely time to pursue something physical. 19th of planting, 3334. It had been almost half a year, but an order was finally restored. Anti-dogmatic political parties had sprung up everywhere, and the greatest scientific minds were leading them. But these scientists were like me, not Thane. And here I was in the middle of it all, wishing I could still be observing the stars. I was the leader, legally elected in everything. My council was the 7 plus a few, though I was constantly racked with anxiety about how I could have stopped this from happening in the first place. I was happy with the direction we were going, at least, for now. Our goals were competing, the decryption and deciphering of the signal, and maintaining order in the dynamic new world. I hoped by the time the signal was done, we had a new goal so that we could continue the work of science and not petty politics. But that was not today's concern. I hadn't been in the observatory for months. My new office was in the Capitol building. It was far too opulent for my taste, built and furnished by the corruption of the dogmatics. It was far too big for me. Walls, floor, and ceiling of gilded marble and covered with tapestries and rugs, etc. I kinda hated my life. The door opened and my reason for accepting this sauntered in. As Scarlett approached the desk, I pretended to be working.
Hey, Ty, the last of the dogmatics have waved the white flag. We now have no enemies.
Just because we can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. I knew I was being paranoid, but that had been my life for 20 years. No, it's not simple paranoia, it's the truth. There are always people that want to take you down, even if it's just for fun or spite, and we know the dogmatics are dedicated.
Well, At least we can now focus on our translations.
How far have we gotten?
Dave says it's only a few teraflops so far, and we also have a few sound recordings, and man, are they eerie.
She shivered as she remembered the sounds.
There's one phrase that looks significant, something called the Kyoto Protocol. Apparently, it's about first contacts and alien meetings and stuff like that. But that's about all we know right now.
Do you think we are chasing our tails? I mean, can we ever really translate and or learn a completely alien language?
Sequoia, a sort of quasi-xenolinguist, thinks there might be more than one language in those recordings.
She smiled, sitting on my lap.
Yeah, it is great, silly. She thinks that having multiple starting points may help us figure out how they think, maybe making true translation possible. I ain't no linguist myself, but it sounds reasonable. How long until a ship comes around these parts again?
277 years. That's when it will be close enough to at least try to pull it into orbit. I answered with a sigh. I would never see it through. Perhaps it will give us the opportunity to pull enough data that we could use their science and technology to help us.
We can only hope, sweetie.
She nuzzled me.